You are joining me as we enter my grandparents' bedroom. This room was designed by my mother and her husband. We sent my grandparents away on a trip and it took them 3 days to design it. It was a surprise for them. When we told them to come back to the house, we had said that the bedroom had flooded. They came back in a flame, and when they opened the door they were shocked. Not because it was flooded of course, but they said that it looked absolutely magnificent. We are now going to enter the ensuite. You can see the Anderson tree from the bathroom window as well. My nan designed this bathroom. Well, the riffraffs are coming, so they're going to need a bath now.
This is my favorite bathroom. I can lay outside and very clean. This is how Grandma washes that. I'm gonna be Grandma. Give me your foot. That tickles.
I chose this room because it's also my favorite bathroom. And the reason I wanted to be in this room is to look at what they said about the fact that I failed to meet the minimum requirements of a junior nurse. As far as I'm concerned, that is rubbish and needs to be flushed. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that if you look at my qualifications, I have nursing qualifications. I qualified as a registered mental health nurse in 1991. After that, in 1993, I took a training for teaching and assessing in clinical practice so that I could mentor students. And I also did preceptorship training in September 93. So I'm well qualified to mentor student nurses. Now, besides that, in terms of my psychotherapy qualifications, I've a master's in psychology, a diploma in group analysis, a degree in counseling, a diploma in psychodynamic counseling, a certificate in supervision, a certificate in counseling skills, and a certificate in working with women who were sexually abused. Now, if you look at my experience, I have 23 years of nursing experience, nursing in the NHS. And in those years, I worked in various settings. I worked as a junior nurse to start with, which was for only 5 months. After that, I was promoted to be a senior nurse E grade, and I worked on acute admission, medium secure unit, drug and alcohol unit. And after that, I was a charge nurse, a G grade charge nurse for 6 years in a personality disorder therapeutic community. And when I left, I went to work in the community as a G grade community nurse with a nursing agent. When I came back again in the NHS, I worked as a deputy nurse manager at a women's crisis house. And then I moved over to become a psychotherapist, full-time psychotherapist at Band 8, working in an outpatient unit. Now, in terms of nursing experience, besides working, I also mentored student nurses for over 16 years. So with all that experience, you would think people would question why would a person with so much experience fail to meet the minimum requirement of a junior nurse. The investigators only talked to the B team, which is known to bend the truth or bend the focus. That's Penny Vera, Karen Checha, Dashika Patel, and Dean Pinnock. Now, what manager would let a nurse who is failing to meet the minimum requirements of the post let that nurse work without a mentor, work without induction, work without another nurse to show her ropes for 6 weeks? Why did the investigators not look at my work? They know, because they work for the Priory, they know that there's an induction book. Why didn't they ask for the induction book? My induction book covered most of the time I was on probation, and the performance plan only covered the last month. So all my probation period was based on a month after I set up. Now, the other thing was they could also have looked at my care plans. My care plans were of high standard. All 19 care plans were of high standard. They could have looked at the CPA report which I wrote when I was given enough time to write it. That was of a very high standard. And when I presented it, people did comments on it and asked it for my qualifications. Other people's reports, when they made a mess of their reports, I was asked to redo them. So they could have looked at all those reports I have written. Then they could have looked at the change in my patient's behavior and looked at my notes to see the change, because you can see I documented whatever we're doing and whatever changes were happening. And what is also interesting is that my suggestions, when I made good suggestions, nothing I did which was positive was ever mentioned. For example, when I joined the CAPO, my first ward round after 6 weeks, I had studied that there was a patient who was not getting his medication because it was prescribed at a time he was sleeping. When we went into the ward round, I asked the consultant to change the time so that he can get his medication the time when he was awake. The consultant was actually changed it, and while he was in the process of rewriting it, the nurse I was with then said, no, don't mind her, she's just a night nurse. And then he re-prescribed it at a time when a patient is sleeping. A few days later, we got a report to say that on Keppel ward we had 64 drug errors. So I took that information to the consultant, and he agreed to change the medication, and our drug errors went way down. The other thing which I did differently was the ward round notes. Primary nurses were not writing ward round for their patients, which I never understood, because as a primary nurse, you should be telling the team what you're doing with your patients, rather than asking people who are coming in for bank to write ward round notes. There was resistance to that, including Karen Cheshire. Eventually, people on cable started doing it with good effects. So all the good things I did, nobody mentioned them. What they did was pick up on little things and blow them out of proportion. And all the investigators looked at was the performance improvement action, which just covered the last month, and which its objectives were identified from other nurses' weaknesses, not my weaknesses. Then the other thing they could have done was look at the letter which was written by the doctor I was working with. Why didn't they look at that? Reading that letter, you would question why would somebody seen in that way could be reported to have been to have failed to meet the requirements of a junior nurse. So with all that evidence, I keep asking myself, how come the investigators didn't question it? How come they could believe that someone like me would fail to meet the minimum requirements of a junior nurse? The only answer I have is that because I live and work in a very racist society, where it's easier to believe that a black person like me is, with all my qualifications, with all my experience, is seen as incompetent, rather than believe that the white managers were lying. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my personal educated opinion, and I will say it again. Whatever the Priory put on me as an incompetent person was rubbish, and today I'm flushing it down.